The jungle smelled like death and flowers mixed together. Roy Bennett pulled himself from the smoking wreckage of his scout ship, blood dripping from a cut above his left eye. Green vines already began creeping over the twisted metal, as if the planet wanted to swallow his mistakes whole. His radio crackled with static. No voices came through. The crash had thrown him far from any patrol routes, deep into unexplored space where rescue teams would never think to look. Roy wiped the blood from his face and checked his gear. His rifle still worked. His medical kit survived the impact. His food supplies would last maybe 10 days if he rationed carefully. The trees around him stretched higher than Earth's redwoods, their thick trunks covered in purple bark that pulsed with a faint glow. Strange bird calls echoed from the canopy above, mixing with the distant sound of rushing water. This world lived and breathed in ways that made his skin crawl. Roy had survived 3 wars and 2 alien invasions. He knew how to stay alive in hostile territory. First rule, find water. Second rule, find shelter. Third rule, never assume you are alone. He shouldered his pack and started walking toward the sound of water, his boots sinking into the soft ground covered with luminescent moss. Every few steps, he marked trees with his combat knife, creating a trail back to his ship. The wreckage might contain salvageable parts if he could repair the communication system. The water source turned out to be a crystal-clear stream that wound between massive tree roots. Roy knelt to fill his canteen, using purification tablets even though the water looked clean. Alien worlds had ways of killing humans that Earth diseases never imagined. A twig snapped behind him. Roy spun around, rifle raised. 3 small creatures stood at the edge of the clearing, frozen like deer caught in headlights. They looked like tiger cubs, but they walked upright on 2 legs and wore simple leather clothing. Their orange fur had black stripes, and their eyes glowed with intelligence that no Earth animal possessed. The largest cub, barely reaching Roy's waist, held a carved wooden spear. The other 2 carried woven baskets filled with colorful fruits. They stared at Roy with wide eyes, their striped tails twitching with nervousness. Roy slowly lowered his rifle. These were children, whatever species they belonged to. They seemed more curious than afraid, though they kept their distance. One of the smaller cubs whispered something in a language that sounded like purring mixed with clicks. "Easy there, little ones," Roy said in his calmest voice. "I won't hurt you." The cubs tilted their heads at his words, clearly not understanding but recognizing the peaceful tone. The largest one took a brave step forward, raising one small paw in what might have been a greeting. That was when the real predator struck. A creature the size of a grizzly bear burst from the undergrowth behind the cubs. It looked like a cross between a lizard and a wolf, with scales instead of fur and teeth like broken glass. The cubs screamed and scattered, but the beast focused on the smallest one who had tripped over his own basket. Roy did not think. He moved. His rifle barked 3 times, bullets punching into the creature's thick hide. The beast roared and turned toward him, abandoning its original prey. Good. Roy kept firing as he ran sideways, drawing the monster away from the cubs. The creature charged with surprising speed. Roy dove behind a fallen log just as massive claws raked the air where his head had been. He rolled to his feet and kept shooting, aiming for the eyes and mouth where the hide looked softer. His rifle clicked empty. The beast gathered itself for another charge. Roy drew his combat knife, knowing it would not be enough against something that size. But the cubs were safe now. That had to count for something. The largest cub appeared beside him, wooden spear raised. The other 2 flanked the creature from different sides, moving with coordinated precision that surprised Roy. These were not helpless children. They knew how to hunt. "Get back," Roy shouted, but they ignored him. The cub with the spear darted forward and jabbed at the creature's rear leg, drawing blood. When the beast turned toward him, the other cubs attacked from the sides with sharp stones. They moved like a pack, working together to confuse and distract their enemy. Roy saw his chance. While the creature spun to face the cubs, he sprinted forward and drove his knife deep into its neck, finding the major artery. Hot blood sprayed across his hands as the beast collapsed, its roar fading to a wheeze. The cubs cheered in their strange language, jumping up and down with excitement. But Roy felt his legs give out. The adrenaline faded and pain flooded through his body. The crash had hurt him worse than he thought. His vision blurred as he fell to his knees. The largest cub caught him before he hit the ground. The small creature was stronger than he looked, supporting Roy's weight with surprising ease. The other cubs gathered around, their eyes wide with concern. One of them pressed something soft against the cut on Roy's head. Another offered him water from a carved gourd. They spoke to each other in rapid whispers, gesturing toward the dead creature and then toward Roy. Roy understood. These cubs had witnessed him risk his life to save them. In their culture, that probably meant something important. He had interfered in their world, but maybe that was not entirely bad. The largest cub tugged at Roy's sleeve and pointed deeper into the jungle. He seemed to be asking Roy to follow them. Roy looked back toward his crashed ship, then at the 3 cubs who had just helped him kill a monster. His ship was not going anywhere. His radio was dead. His chances of rescue were essentially 0. But these cubs were alive because he had acted without thinking. Maybe that was enough of a purpose for now. Roy nodded and let the cubs help him to his feet. They supported him as they walked into the jungle, away from his old life and toward something completely unknown. Behind them, the dead creature's blood sank into the glowing moss, feeding the alien soil. The adventure was just beginning. Roy had never seen a city built in trees before. The cubs led him through a maze of rope bridges and carved platforms that spiraled up the massive trunks like a wooden galaxy. Their village hung suspended between branches thicker than subway tunnels, connected by walkways that swayed gently in the breeze. Dozens of adult tiger beings gathered to stare at the strange visitor. They were larger than the cubs, standing as tall as Roy's shoulders with muscular builds and intelligent eyes. Their fur ranged from bright orange to deep gold, all marked with the distinctive black stripes of their species. They wore leather armor decorated with carved bone and carried weapons that looked both primitive and deadly. Roy felt their hostility like heat from a fire. Low growls rumbled through the crowd as the cubs explained what had happened at the stream. Some of the adults bared their teeth when they looked at his rifle. Others pointed at his strange clothing and whispered among themselves. An elderly female pushed through the crowd. Her fur had turned silver with age, and she walked with a staff carved from what looked like crystallized wood. The other tiger beings stepped aside respectfully, and Roy realized this must be their leader. She studied Roy for a long moment, her golden eyes taking in every detail. Then she spoke to the cubs in their musical language. The largest cub, who Roy had started thinking of as Leo, responded with excited gestures toward the jungle where they had fought the creature. The elderly leader's expression shifted. She asked Leo several sharp questions, and the cub's answers made her ears perk forward with interest. The other 2 cubs joined in, apparently backing up Leo's story. Finally, the leader turned to Roy. She placed her right paw over her heart and said something that sounded formal and important. Roy copied the gesture, hoping it was the right response. She smiled, showing sharp canine teeth, and gestured for him to follow her. The leader's dwelling sat at the village's highest point, built into a natural hollow in the great tree's trunk. Sunlight filtered through windows cut into the living wood, casting dancing shadows on walls covered with painted symbols and carved scenes of hunts and battles. Roy sank gratefully into a pile of soft furs, while the leader prepared something that smelled like herbal tea. His head wound had stopped bleeding, but exhaustion weighed on him like a heavy blanket. The crash, the fight, and the long walk had pushed his injured body to its limits. The leader returned with a steaming cup and what looked like medicinal paste. She introduced herself with a word that sounded like Sira, then pointed to Roy with a questioning tilt of her head. "Roy," he said, tapping his chest. "Roy Bennett." "Roy," she repeated carefully, the name strange in her mouth. Over the next hour, using gestures and simple drawings in the dirt floor, Roy began to understand the situation. Sira was indeed the village elder, and the 3 cubs belonged to different families. They had been playing near the stream when the predator attacked, and Roy's intervention had saved them from certain death. But Sira's expression grew troubled as she drew more symbols in the dirt. She sketched what looked like other tiger beings, but these wore different armor and carried larger weapons. She drew them attacking villages and taking cubs away, leaving behind burning homes and grieving families. Roy pointed to the hostile warriors in her drawings and raised his eyebrows questioningly. Sira's growl was low and full of pain. She drew a larger symbol that clearly represented a military leader, then scratched angry lines through several village symbols. A war was coming, or maybe it had already started. Someone was targeting the cubs specifically, which seemed like a particularly cruel way to destroy a people's future. Roy had seen similar tactics during the colonial wars on the Outer Rim. Kill the children and the species dies within a generation. Sierra must have seen the understanding in Roy's eyes because she leaned forward eagerly. She pointed to his rifle, then to herself, then made a gesture that clearly meant teach. She wanted to learn how to fight back with his weapons and tactics. Roy shook his head and pointed to his rifle, then held up his hands to show it was complex. These people had not developed gunpowder yet, and their metallurgy looked primitive compared to human standards. He could not just hand them advanced weapons, but he could teach them strategy. Roy smoothed the dirt and began drawing simple military formations. He showed Sierra how small groups could defeat larger forces using terrain advantages and coordinated attacks. He sketched ambush positions and explained the importance of communication and timing. Sierra watched with growing excitement, asking questions through gestures and occasionally trying to repeat his tactical drawings. Her intelligence was obvious, and she grasped concepts quickly. Roy found himself impressed by how rapidly she understood principles that had taken human military colleges centuries to develop. As the sun set outside, painting the tree city in golden light, more adults gathered in Sierra's dwelling. Word had spread about the strange alien who fought beside their cubs and now shared knowledge with their elder. They watched Roy's impromptu lesson with fascination and growing hope. Leo and the other cubs squeezed into the circle, their eyes bright with interest. Roy realized they understood more than the adults about what he was teaching because they had seen it work. They had witnessed human tactics defeat a superior opponent through teamwork and quick thinking. One of the adult warriors, a scarred male with graying fur, challenged Roy to demonstrate his fighting skills. Roy was exhausted and injured, but he recognized the importance of proving himself. These people needed to believe he could teach them something valuable. The warrior handed Roy a practice sword made of carved wood. It felt clumsy compared to his combat knife, but Roy adjusted his grip and stance. The warrior attacked with impressive speed and strength, but his technique was straightforward and predictable. Roy used his opponent's momentum against him, stepping aside and using leverage to throw the larger warrior to the ground. The tiger being landed hard but unhurt, and the watching crowd murmured with approval. Roy helped his opponent to his feet and gestured to show how the technique worked. Within minutes, he had several warriors practicing the throw on each other. They learned quickly, their natural balance and coordination making them excellent students. Roy showed them 3 more techniques before his injured body forced him to stop. Sierra provided Roy with a sleeping area in a smaller chamber of her dwelling. As he lay on the soft furs listening to the night sounds of the alien forest, he thought about his situation. His ship was wrecked, his rescue chances were essentially zero, and he was alone on a world where intelligent tiger people were fighting a war for their children's survival. He should be terrified. Instead, he felt more useful than he had in years. These people needed help, and he had skills that could make a difference. For the first time since his military discharge, Roy had found a purpose that mattered. Outside his window, he could hear the cubs playing on the walkways, their laughter mixing with their parents' worried conversations. Tomorrow he would begin training anyone willing to learn. He would teach them that sometimes the best way to protect your children was to make sure they could protect themselves. The war was coming whether he helped or not. But with human tactical knowledge backing their natural courage, these tiger people might just have a chance to save their cubs and their future. The morning rain drummed against the leaves high above as Roy watched 20 young tiger beings practice formation, fighting in the village's training circle. 3 weeks had passed since his arrival, and the adolescents were starting to move like a real military unit instead of a group of enthusiastic individuals. "Tala, watch your left flank," Roy called to a young female whose orange fur gleamed with moisture. "Never assume your teammate will cover a gap you can fill yourself." The students adjusted their positions smoothly, weapons moving in practiced arcs as they responded to his commands. These teenagers, caught between cubhood and full warrior status, had proven to be his best students. Unlike the older warriors who struggled to abandon lifelong habits, the young ones absorbed new tactics like dry ground soaking up rain. Leo, now Roy's unofficial assistant instructor, demonstrated a flanking maneuver to a group of newer students. The cub who had once trembled beside a stream now moved with confidence and precision, his wooden spear spinning in complex patterns as he showed the others how to break an enemy formation. "The key is timing," Leo explained in the tiger being language. which Roy had begun to understand after weeks of immersion. Watch how Roy taught us to count together. 1, 2, now. The young warriors executed a coordinated attack that would have made human Marines proud. They had learned to think as a unit while maintaining individual initiative, a balance that took most soldiers years to achieve. Roy smiled as he watched them train. These cubs had something special. They combined natural hunting instincts with an eagerness to learn that reminded him of his best recruits from the old days. More importantly, they were learning to fight not just for victory, but for protection of others. Elder Sira approached through the rain, her silver fur dark with moisture. "The scouts have returned," she said quietly. "General Apex's army is moving toward the eastern settlements. They will reach the Brightclaw village within 2 days." Roy's smile faded. General Apex was the name the tiger beings used for their enemy leader, a warlord who believed that eliminating cubs would make his own clan dominant. For weeks, Roy had heard reports of his attacks. Villages burned, families scattered, cubs taken as prisoners to be raised as soldiers for Apex's cause. "How many fighters does Brightclaw have?" Roy asked. 12 adults plus some older cubs. "Against Apex's 100 warriors, they will not survive the night." Sira's ears flattened with grief. "We cannot reach them in time with enough fighters to make a difference." Roy looked at his trainees, still practicing in the rain with determination written on their young faces. They were not ready for real combat. Most had never killed anything larger than a hunting prey, and certainly never faced experienced soldiers trying to kill them. But the cubs at Brightclaw would die without help. "How fast can we travel if we take only the lightest gear?" Roy asked. Sira's golden eyes widened. "You cannot mean to attack Apex with cubs. They are children, Roy. Brave children, but still children. These children have been training for 3 weeks with human military tactics. They know things about warfare that Apex's soldiers have never imagined." Roy gestured toward his students, "And they understand something that pure warriors often forget. They are not fighting to win glory. They are fighting to save other cubs like themselves." Roy called his trainees to gather around him. Rain continued to fall, but none of them sought shelter. They stood at attention, wooden weapons held with pride, their striped faces serious and alert. "Tonight we face our first real battle," Roy announced. "General Apex's army is moving against a village full of cubs who cannot defend themselves. Those cubs will die unless someone helps them." A ripple of growls went through the group. These young warriors had all lost friends or relatives to Apex's raids. The chance to strike back filled their eyes with fierce light. "This is not a game," Roy continued. "Real enemies will try to kill you with real weapons. Some of you might not come home. Anyone who wants to stay behind, speak now. No shame in protecting this village instead." None of the cubs moved. Leo stepped forward and placed his paw over his heart in the formal gesture of commitment. "We follow you, Roy. We follow you to save the cubs." The others repeated the gesture, their voices joining in a low chant that raised the fur on Roy's arms. These were not human soldiers following orders. These were pack hunters choosing to protect their young, and that made them more dangerous than any army. Sira watched the scene with mixture of pride and terror. "If you do this thing, if you take cubs into battle against Apex's veterans, there will be no going back. Win or lose, the war will escalate beyond anything we have seen." "The war was always going to escalate," Roy replied. "Apex won't stop until every free village bows to him or burns to ashes. The only question is whether we meet him as victims or as warriors." They traveled through the night using paths that only the cubs knew, game trails that wound between the massive trees like secret highways. Roy marveled at how silently his young soldiers moved through terrain that would have challenged Earth's best scouts. Their natural grace combined with disciplined formation training made them nearly invisible. As dawn approached, they reached the hills overlooking Brightclaw village. Roy's heart sank as he saw Apex's army spread across the valley below. Hundreds of warriors in black-painted armor surrounded the small settlement, their weapons glinting in the early sunlight. They had not attacked yet, but the trap was perfectly set. "Why do they wait?" Tala whispered beside him. Roy studied the enemy positions through his rifle scope. "They want the villagers to see them coming. Fear is a weapon too. Apex wants the cubs to watch their parents die slowly." The cruelty of the tactic made Roy's jaw clench with anger. This was not warfare. It was terrorism designed to break the spirit of an entire people. No human military code would tolerate such methods, but Apex was not human. "We cannot attack that many enemies directly," Leo observed. Even with your tactics, we are too few. Roy smiled grimly. Who said anything about attacking them directly? We are going to make them attack each other. For the next hour, Roy explained his plan to the confused cubs. It relied on misdirection, false intelligence, and the kind of psychological warfare that human armies had perfected during the information wars. The cubs would split into small teams and position themselves around the valley, creating the illusion of a much larger force. Remember, Roy concluded, your job is not to defeat Apex's army. Your job is to confuse them, frighten them, and make them make mistakes. Let their own numbers work against them. As the sun rose higher, Roy's cubs melted into the forest around the valley. Within minutes, they had disappeared so completely that Roy had trouble spotting them, even though he knew where they were hiding. Phase 1 of the plan began when Leo's team started a small fire on the eastern ridge, creating smoke that looked like signal communications between Allied forces. Phase 2 involved Tala's group making noise in the western woods, suggesting the movement of a large war party. Roy watched through his scope as Apex's commanders began pointing at the smoke and sending scouts toward the sounds. The enemy was reacting exactly as human psychology predicted. When faced with unknown threats, they would split their forces to investigate. The real battle was about to begin, and for the first time since his crash landing, Roy felt like he was exactly where he belonged. These cubs had taught him that protecting the innocent was worth any risk. Now he would teach them that sometimes the smallest warriors could achieve the greatest victories. The victory at Brightclaw Village changed everything. Word spread across the Tiger Being territories like wildfire. 20 cubs and 1 alien warrior had defeated General Apex's advance force, saving an entire settlement using tactics no one had ever seen before. Some called it impossible, others called it magic. The survivors called it hope. Roy stood at the edge of Ironbark Village watching their newest allies practice the formation techniques that had become his signature. 2 months had passed since Brightclaw, and his small band of trained cubs had grown into something resembling a real army. Representatives from 12 villages had come to learn from the strange human who fought like their ancient legends promised. The Goldmane clan chief wants to challenge you to single combat, Leo reported, approaching with the easy confidence of a seasoned warrior despite his youth. He says no outsider should command Tiger Being forces without proving his strength in the old way. Roy sighed. Every village brought the same test. The traditional leaders could not accept that warfare had evolved beyond personal prowess and individual heroics. They still thought in terms of champion versus champion duels instead of coordinated unit tactics. Set it up for this evening, Roy replied, but make sure the whole village watches. They need to see why the old ways are not enough anymore. Tala emerged from the weapons practice area, her orange fur marked with training scars that she wore like medals. She had become Roy's best squad leader, with an intuitive understanding of battlefield psychology that impressed even him. The messenger birds came back from the northern clans, she reported. 3 more villages want to join us, but they are asking about the prophecy. They want to know if you are really the Starwalker from the old stories. Roy frowned. The prophecy talk had started after Brightclaw, when some of the elder warriors began connecting his arrival to ancient Tiger Being legends. According to their mythology, a warrior would fall from the sky during their darkest hour and teach their cubs to fight like the stars themselves, as one light made from many. I am just a soldier who got lost, Roy said firmly. The prophecy nonsense needs to stop. People follow tactics and training, not mystical promises. But what if the prophecy is real? Leo asked quietly. What if you came here because it was meant to happen? The timing seems too perfect to be coincidence. Roy looked at his 2 best students, cubs who had grown into capable warriors under his guidance. They wanted to believe in something greater than random chance, something that gave meaning to the pain and struggle of war. He understood the need for hope, but he also knew how dangerous it could be to rely on prophecies instead of preparation. Even if the prophecy is real, it does not matter, he said finally. What matters is that we train hard, fight smart, and protect the innocent. The rest is just stories. But privately, Roy was beginning to wonder if the cubs might be right. His crash landing had been caused by a navigation malfunction that still made no sense to him. His ship had been drawn to this specific world as if something had been calling him here. And the Tiger Being cubs had adapted to human military tactics with a speed that defied Explanation, maybe some coincidences, were too large to ignore. The single combat challenge took place in Ironbark's central clearing as the sun set behind the great trees. The Goldmane chief was a massive warrior named Brack, with scars across his golden fur and muscles like steel cables. He wielded a war hammer that looked heavy enough to crush bones, and his reputation for strength was legendary even among the tiger beings. Roy faced him with only a wooden practice sword and his human-made combat armor. The size difference was comical. Brack stood nearly twice Roy's height and probably weighed 3 times as much. The watching villagers murmured among themselves, many clearly expecting to see the strange alien crushed like an insect. "This is how wars were won in the old days," Brack announced, raising his hammer above his head. "Strength against strength, warrior against warrior. Not with tricks and hiding like a coward." Roy did not respond to the insult. Instead, he studied his opponent's stance and movement patterns, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. Brack was strong and experienced, but he fought like an individual rather than as part of a team. That would be his downfall. The duel began with Brack's charge, his warhammer whistling through the air where Roy's head had been a moment before. Roy rolled aside and struck at the chief's knee with his wooden sword, causing Brack to stumble but not fall. For the next several minutes, Roy demonstrated every principle he had been teaching the cubs. He used mobility against strength, timing against power, and intelligence against brute force. Every time Brack swung his massive weapon, Roy was somewhere else, landing small but precise strikes that gradually wore down his opponent. The watching villagers grew quiet as they realized what they were seeing. This was not just a fight between 2 warriors. It was a lesson about the evolution of combat itself. The old ways of individual heroics were being systematically defeated by new principles of tactical thinking. Finally, Roy saw his opening. Brack overextended himself with a particularly powerful swing, and Roy stepped inside his reach, using the chief's own momentum to throw him to the ground. The wooden sword came to rest against Brack's throat, and the duel was over. Roy helped the defeated chief to his feet, showing respect despite his victory. "Your strength is impressive and your courage is beyond question," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "But strength alone cannot win wars anymore. The enemies we face use numbers and coordination. We must learn to do the same." Brack stared at Roy for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Teach me," he said simply. "Teach my warriors. If the old ways are not enough, then show us the new ways." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Roy knew he had gained another valuable ally. But his satisfaction was short-lived. A messenger arrived just as the celebration began, bringing news that made Roy's blood run cold. General Apex had grown tired of losing battles to superior tactics. If he could not defeat Roy's army in the field, he would force them to come to him. Apex's forces had surrounded the Moonwhisper village and taken every cub hostage. His message was simple: surrender the alien warrior, or watch the next generation die slowly. Roy felt the weight of every gaze in the clearing. The prophecy suddenly seemed less important than the reality that hundreds of innocent cubs would pay the price for his interference in their war. The tiger beings had accepted him as their teacher and leader, but leadership meant making impossible choices. "How many warriors does Apex have at Moonwhisper?" Roy asked the messenger. "More than 1,000, arranged in defensive positions around the mountain approaches." He chose the location carefully. "There is only one path to reach the village, and it passes through a narrow canyon where his archers can kill anyone who approaches." Roy closed his eyes and thought through the tactical situation. Apex had learned from his previous defeats and chosen a position where Roy's mobility advantages would be useless. The canyon would funnel any attacking force into a killing zone, making coordinated tactics impossible. But there was another way to think about the problem. If Apex expected Roy to attack the canyon, then Roy needed to attack something else entirely. "Send messages to all our allied villages," Roy told Leo and Tala. "Tell them to gather every warrior they can spare and meet us at the Singing Falls in 3 days. We are going to save those cubs, but not the way Apex expects." As the messenger scattered into the night, Roy looked up at the alien stars that had become familiar friends during his months on this world. Somewhere among those lights was Earth, the home he would probably never see again. But this world had become home too, and these tiger beings had become his people. The final battle was coming, and Roy intended to make sure that when the legends were told in years to come, They would speak of the day the cubs learned to fight like stars, individually bright, but together, brilliant enough to light up the darkness. The assault on Crimson Valley began before dawn with the sound of falling rocks. Roy had spent 3 sleepless nights studying every approach to General Apex's mountain fortress, looking for weaknesses that a conventional army would never consider. He found his answer not in the heavily defended canyon, but in the ancient mining tunnels that honeycombed the mountain itself. Phase 1 is complete, Tala reported through the hand signals Roy had taught them for silent communication. The explosives are set in the upper mine shafts. When we trigger them, the rock slides should block the canyon exit and trap half of Apex's army inside. Roy nodded from his position overlooking the fortress. Below them, General Apex's forces were arranged in perfect defensive positions, their weapons trained on the narrow canyon that represented the only obvious approach to the captured cubs. Apex had chosen his battleground well, but he had made one crucial mistake. He was thinking like a traditional warrior instead of a human tactician. Leo crouched beside Roy, his striped face painted with mud for camouflage. The cub who had once trembled beside a stream was now Roy's most trusted lieutenant, capable of leading complex operations with the skill of a veteran soldier. The diversion teams are in position, Leo whispered. As soon as you give the signal, they will attack the eastern defenses. That should draw most of Apex's reserves away from the prison compound. Roy checked his rifle one final time, then looked at the army he had built over the past months. 500 tiger-being warriors crouched among the rocks, their wooden weapons supplemented by captured enemy gear and improvised explosives. Most were still young, some barely past cubhood, but they moved with the precision and confidence of a professional military unit. They had learned Roy's lessons well. More importantly, they had learned to believe in each other. Remember the plan, Roy said quietly, his voice carrying to every warrior through the network of hand signals they had practiced. We are not here to defeat Apex's army. We are here to rescue the cubs and get out alive. Speed and coordination matter more than individual heroics. The attack began with Tala's explosives bringing down half the mountain face in a roar of falling stone. The rockslide sealed the canyon exit just as Roy had calculated, trapping 300 of Apex's warriors in a natural prison. The remaining defenders turned toward the sound of destruction, their perfect formations dissolving into confusion. That was when Leo's diversion team struck the eastern walls with burning arrows and improvised catapults. The defenders rushed to meet this obvious threat, leaving the prisoner compound lightly guarded exactly as Roy had predicted. Roy's main assault force moved through the chaos like ghosts, using the smoke and dust from the rockslide as cover. They had practiced this operation dozens of times in their hidden valley, learning to navigate by touch and memory when visibility dropped to zero. The prison compound consisted of wooden cages built into natural caves, designed to hold the captured cubs until they could be broken and retrained as soldiers for Apex's cause. Roy felt sick as he saw the frightened faces pressed against the wooden bars, cubs barely old enough to walk trapped like animals by adults who should have been protecting them. Breck, take your team and secure the eastern approach, Roy commanded. The former Goldmane chief had become one of his most reliable squad leaders, his traditional warrior skills enhanced by human tactical training. Tala, get those cages open. Leo, you are with me. Time to end this war. General Apex waited in the central chamber of his fortress, a massive cavern lit by torches and decorated with the weapons of defeated enemies. The warlord himself was the largest tiger being Roy had ever seen, his black striped fur scarred from countless battles and his yellow eyes burning with the fanatic light of absolute certainty. So the alien coward finally shows his face, Apex growled, hefting a war axe that looked capable of splitting trees. Did you think your tricks and clever tactics would save you forever? This ends here, Starwalker. Your cubs will watch you die, and then they will learn to serve a real warrior. Roy stepped into the chamber alone, leaving Leo and the others to coordinate the rescue operation. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment he first saved those cubs by the stream. Apex represented everything Roy despised: the strong preying on the weak, the use of terror as a weapon, the corruption of warrior honor into simple brutality. The only thing ending here is your war against children, Roy replied, drawing his combat knife alongside a captured tiger-being sword. Those cubs you took are going home to their families. Apex laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. You truly believe your own legend, do not you? The great Starwalker who fell from the sky to save us all, but you are just one small alien, and I have killed many enemies stronger than you. The duel that followed would be remembered in Tiger Being songs for generations. Roy fought with every skill he had learned in 3 wars and 40 years of soldiering, enhanced by months of training with Tiger Being weapons and tactics. But Apex was a legend himself, a warrior who had conquered half a continent through personal skill and ruthless determination. They circled each other in the torchlit chamber, weapons clashing in showers of sparks. Apex's axe could have split Roy in half with a direct hit, but Roy used his human agility and smaller size to stay inside the larger weapon's reach. Every technique he had taught the cubs, every principle of leverage and timing and psychological advantage, came into play. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Roy landed dozens of small cuts and slashes, gradually wearing down his larger opponent. But Apex's superior strength and reach made every exchange dangerous. One mistake, one moment of lost focus, and the war would be over. That mistake came when Apex, frustrated by Roy's mobility, attempted to pin him against the chamber wall with a massive overhand swing. Roy rolled aside at the last second, and the axe buried itself deep in the stone. As Apex struggled to free his weapon, Roy struck with both blades, driving them deep into the warlord's chest. Apex staggered backward, yellow eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. "I am the strongest. I always win." "Strength is not enough," Roy gasped, his own body marked with wounds from the brutal fight. "You forgot the most important lesson. A real warrior protects the weak instead of preying on them." Apex fell to his knees, then collapsed forward onto the stone floor. The warlord who had terrorized a dozen clans was finally defeated, brought down by principles he had never understood. Roy heard cheering from the compound outside, the voices of rescued cubs mixing with the battle cries of his warriors. The rescue was complete, and Apex's leaderless army was already beginning to scatter. Without their general's fanatic certainty to hold them together, most of the enemy soldiers had no desire to continue fighting a war they no longer understood. But victory came with a price. Roy felt his strength leaving him as blood flowed from wounds that were deeper than he had realized. Apex's axe had found its mark more than once, and Roy's human body could not heal from such damage as quickly as the Tiger Beings could. Leo and Tala found him sitting against the chamber wall, breathing heavily, but smiling as he watched the rescued cubs reunite with their families. His rifle lay across his knees, and his combat knife was still stained with Apex's blood. "The mountain is ours," Leo reported. "Apex's army has scattered, and the southern clans are already sending messages of surrender." "The war is over, Roy. We won." Roy nodded weakly. "The cubs are safe?" "All of them," Tala confirmed. "Frightened but unharmed. Their families are taking them home." As the sun rose over Crimson Valley, painting the ancient mountains in shades of gold and red, Roy Bennett closed his eyes and let himself rest for the first time in months. He had accomplished something that would have been impossible for any conventional army. He had taught a generation of Tiger Being cubs that courage and intelligence could triumph over brute force and cruelty. The legend of the Starwalker was just beginning, but the man who had earned that title was finally ready to sleep. 50 years had passed since the Battle of Crimson Valley, and the jungle where Roy Bennett first crashed his ship had become a place of pilgrimage. Young Tiger Beings from across the planet came here to touch the monument, built from pieces of his original spacecraft. Reading the words carved in both human and Tiger Being script, Captain Roy Bennett, Starwalker, teacher, legend. He showed us that the greatest warriors are those who create warriors greater than themselves. Elder Leo, his orange fur now silver with age, led a group of cubs through the memorial grove. His wooden leg, carved from the same tree where Roy had first saved them decades ago, tapped against the stone path as he walked. The scars from old battles had faded, but the memories remained as sharp as ever. "Tell us about the Starwalker again," pleaded a small female cub, her striped tail twitching with excitement. "Tell us how he fell from the sky." Leo smiled, settling onto the carved stone bench that faced Roy's statue. The monument showed the human warrior in his combat armor, one hand reaching down to help a fallen cub while the other held his rifle ready against unseen enemies. It captured perfectly the dual nature that had made Roy legendary, protector and teacher, warrior and guardian. Roy Bennett was just a soldier when he came to us, Leo began, his voice carrying the authority of one who had lived the story he told. His ship was broken, his radio was dead, and he was alone on a world he did not understand. But when he saw cubs in danger, he did not hesitate. He fought a monster to save us, even though we were strangers to him. The cubs gathered closer, their young faces rapt with attention. They had heard this story many times, but it never lost its power to inspire. Was he really magic? Asked one of the smallest cubs. Some of the adults say he had powers from the stars, Leo chuckled. Roy always insisted he was just a man with training and experience. But I think there was magic in what he taught us. He showed us that strength comes not from being the biggest or the fastest, but from working together and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. An adult warrior approached the group, her armor bearing the insignia of the United Clan's Defense Force. This was Tala, now General Tala, commander of the military academy that bore Roy's name. Her fur was gray around the muzzle, but her eyes still held the fierce intelligence that had made her Roy's best student. The human delegation has arrived, she reported to Leo. They want to visit the crash site and pay their respects. Leo nodded. Contact with human space had been re-established 20 years ago, when a survey ship detected the Tiger Being civilization's radio signals. The reunion had been emotional for everyone involved, especially when the humans learned that one of their own had become the founding father of Tiger Being military doctrine. The delegation consisted of 5 humans in dress uniforms, led by a woman with admiral stripes on her shoulders. They moved with the precise bearing of professional soldiers, but their eyes were wide with wonder as they took in the memorial complex. Admiral Sarah Chen, the leader, introduced herself, offering the traditional heart-over-chest salute that Roy had taught the Tiger Beings. Earth Fleet Command, we came to honor one of our own, and to thank your people for the alliance you have offered humanity. The honor is ours, Leo replied formally. Roy Bennett gave us more than military training. He gave us hope and unity. Before he came, we were scattered clans fighting each other. Now we are one people, ready to stand with humanity among the stars. The Admiral's expression grew solemn as she approached Roy's statue. Captain Bennett was listed as missing in action for 50 years. We never knew what happened to his ship or why his distress beacon stopped transmitting. Now we understand that he found something more important than rescue, a purpose worth living and dying for. Tala stepped forward, carrying a wooden box carved with intricate designs. Roy left these for any humans who might come looking for him. He worked on them during his final years when age kept him from active teaching. Inside the box were Roy's personal journals, written in both English and Tiger Being script. The pages detailed not just military tactics and training methods, but his observations about Tiger Being culture, his thoughts on leadership, and his hopes for the future of both species. Admiral Chen read a passage aloud. I came to this world by accident, but I stayed by choice. These people taught me that being a warrior is not about winning battles, but about making sure the next generation does not have to fight the same wars we did. If humanity ever finds this journal, I hope they will remember that our greatest victories come not from conquest, but from friendship. The cubs listened with fascination as the humans shared stories about Roy's homeworld, describing the vast cities and technological marvels that seemed like magic to young Tiger Beings. But when Admiral Chen asked if any Tiger Beings wanted to visit Earth, most shook their heads politely. This is our home, explained one of the older cubs. Roy taught us that the most important battles are fought to protect the place where your cubs play safely. We want to see the stars, but we do not want to leave them. As evening approached, the human delegation prepared to depart for their ship in orbit. The Tiger Beings had given them copies of Roy's tactical manuals and training programs, knowledge that would revolutionize human military education. In exchange, the humans had offered advanced technology and a formal military alliance between the species. But the most valuable exchange had been simpler, the recognition that both species shared the same values about protecting the innocent and standing against those who would prey on the weak. Leo walked with Admiral Chen to the landing pad where their shuttle waited. The old Tiger Being moved slowly now, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. He had spent decades expanding on Roy's teachings, developing new training programs and military academies that had spread across the planet. Do you think he knew? The Admiral asked quietly. When Roy decided to stay here, Do you think he understood what kind of legend he would become? Leo considered the question as they watched the cubs practice formation fighting in the distance, their wooden weapons moving in the precise patterns that Roy had taught so long ago. The techniques had evolved over the decades, but the core principles remained unchanged. Protect the innocent, fight as one, and never leave a teammate behind. Roy always said that legends are just stories people tell to remember important lessons, Leo replied. He did not care about becoming famous. He cared about making sure we could protect our cubs when he was no longer here to help us. The shuttle lifted off into the alien sunset, carrying the human delegation back to the stars. But the real legacy of Roy Bennett remained on the ground. In the schools where tiger-being cubs learned human tactical principles, in the unified government that had replaced ancient clan rivalries, and in the simple fact that no tiger-being child had been harmed by war in over 40 years. As night fell over the memorial grove, Leo returned to the statue for his evening meditation. This had been his habit for decades, sitting quietly with his old teacher's memory and thinking about the lessons that still guided his people. Tonight, a new group of cubs had left offerings at the statue's base, carved wooden weapons, drawings of space battles, and handwritten promises to protect other cubs the way Roy had protected them. The legend continued to grow with each generation, but its heart remained the same. Somewhere in the jungle, night predators called to each other across the darkness. But in the villages scattered through the great trees, tiger-being cubs slept safely in their beds, protected by warriors who had learned that true strength comes from unity, wisdom, and the courage to stand between danger and the innocent. The Star Walker had returned to the stars long ago, but his light still guided them through the darkness. And in the end, that was the only kind of immortality that really mattered.